What if the path to finding yourself again was hidden in something as simple as a leaf in the wind, or the silence of a garden? Would you have the courage to listen to what he has to say? Hi, I'm Yuna, and I welcome you to Happiness of Love. Get ready for an exciting story that will leave you amazed. Enjoy the video, and may God bless you and your entire family. Have an amazing day. Chloe Hartman dug her hands into the damp earth, feeling the soft texture slide between her fingers as she adjusted the roots of a small Benjamin fig tree in a ceramic pot. The soft sound of the watering can filling the flower beds around him was the only company that early morning. Eden Botanical Design was as quiet as ever at this hour, with the rising sun turning the leaves a golden green. Chloe closed her eyes for a moment, seeking comfort in the scent of fresh earth. For months now, this daily ritual was the only thing that kept her going. Since her grandmother's death, everything seemed uncertain, but the plants never left her. As she stood up, she looked at the large space of her studio, filled with vases, racks of tools, and hanging plants. It was the legacy left by his grandmother, who turned a passion for gardening into a profitable small business. Chloe knew she needed to keep him alive, but the weight of the accumulated bills and the emptiness of loss were burdens that she was beginning to feel unbearable. Meanwhile, across town, Nathan Sterling knotted his tie with shaking hands, staring at his reflection in his office bathroom mirror. The impeccably ironed white shirt hid the signs of a bad night's sleep, but the sweat on his forehead and tired eyes betrayed his exhaustion. He took a deep breath, adjusting his posture before leaving. The meeting room awaited him, and with it, a new opportunity to prove that Neuron Systems remained invincible in the technology market. Upon entering the room, the silence of the executives gathered there almost swallowed him. Nathan began the presentation with his rehearsed speech, but the words seemed to slip through his mind like sand through his fingers. He tried to focus on the bright screen in front of him, but the edges of his vision began to blur. Sweat ran down the back of his neck, and he felt his chest tighten as if the air had been sucked out of the room. "Nathan, are you okay?" A distant voice interrupted his concentration. He tried to respond, but the room seemed to spin. Nathan just mumbled something incomprehensible before hurriedly leaving perplexed looks behind. In the hallway, he leaned against the wall, struggling to catch his breath. It was the third panic attack in less than a month, and he knew he needed to do something before it destroyed the company he had built with so much effort. Back at Eden Botanical Design, Chloe was answering a call from a potential client. The voice on the other end was formal, but carried a tone of urgency. "We need someone who understands not just design, but creating a space that inspires calm and balance. Are you the right person for this?" the man asked. Chloe hesitated for a moment, but her determination shone through. "Yes, I am. Let's set up a meeting." She had no idea that this project would not only put her skills to the test, but change her life forever. Nathan Sterling sat in his leather office chair, staring into space. His breathing was irregular, as if each inhalation required a superhuman effort. The numbers on the performance report in his hands floated across the page, a blur of statistics and graphs he was supposed to master. But all he could feel was the frantic beating of his own heart, as if the organ was about to rupture his ribs. The panic attack from the previous morning was still reverberating in his mind. He had failed. Again. His company, Neuron Systems, depended on him to maintain his image as an unshakable leader, but the reality was that, with each meeting, he felt further away from that ideal. On the outside, Nathan still wore the confident, cool CEO persona, but inside, he was a chaos engulfed by fears he didn't know how to name, much less control. "Mr. Sterling, your therapist is on the line," the assistant announced, with a tone that mixed concern and professionalism. He pressed the speakerphone button with a trembling finger. "I'm listening." The calm voice on the other end was like an anchor in a stormy sea. "Nathan, we need to talk about what happened. The seizures are becoming more frequent, and you're not allowing yourself to breathe. Literally. I don't have time to breathe. I have deadlines, investors to respond to, a company to lead," he replied, his voice exhausted but firm. "That's why. You won't be able to lead anything if you continue like this. You need a recovery space, a place where you can disconnect, regroup." Nathan sighed, massaging his temples. "What are you suggesting? A break room? I'm not the meditation type. It doesn't have to be a break room. It can be something bigger, something that connects you to something beyond screens and numbers. A therapeutic garden, perhaps." A garden. The word brought back long-buried memories of his childhood, his mother, her hair tied in a flowery scarf, kneeling in the dirt, planting aromatic herbs. He used to help, getting dirt on his hands and laughing when she taught him to distinguish the smell of rosemary from lavender. These memories were a distant comfort, but painful. He hadn't visited that garden since she left. "That seems too idealistic," he muttered. "So see it as an investment. A space that benefits not just you, but your team." Your company needs innovation, but you need balance. Think about it. Across town, Chloe Hartman was finishing a call with the same client who had approached her that morning. Her intuition told her something bigger was lurking, something that could be an opportunity for her and Eden Botanical Design. Arriving at Neuron Systems headquarters the next day, Chloe stopped to admire the glass and steel structure that rose before her. It was modern, imposing, but cold, almost sterile. Something about the architecture seemed to repel any sense of human warmth. She walked in, feeling like an intruder in Nathan Sterling's impersonal, technological world. When he appeared in the conference room, Chloe immediately knew there was something different about the man. He was tall, with a rigid posture, but his eyes carried an invisible weight. She noticed his hands, which he held together on the table, fingers pressing against each other as if that were the only thing keeping him anchored. Nathan looked at Chloe suspiciously. "Are you the landscaper?" She nodded. "I'm Chloe Hartman of Eden Botanical Design. I understand you're looking for a space that promotes calm." "Something like that," he replied, avoiding eye contact. As Chloe expressed initial ideas, Nathan seemed to momentarily disconnect, but at times he asked incisive, almost challenging questions. He was clearly not an easy man to please, but Chloe, used to dealing with demanding clients, held her own. As she explained the benefits of a therapeutic garden, he abruptly interrupted, "Why does it work? How do you know it helps?" Chloe paused, sensing there was something deeper in that question. She approached the table, locking eyes with him. "Because it's already helped me. Sometimes the silence of a garden is the only thing that can make us hear what we really need." Nathan remained silent, impacted by that answer. He saw in her something he recognized in himself, an internal struggle that no one could see but that desperately needed healing. The sound of Nathan's keyboard echoed through the office lit by the bluish light of the monitors. He tried to focus on performance reports, but his mind was constantly pulled to the garden under construction on the ground floor of Neuron Systems. A project that he himself had authorized, but which was beginning to seem like an unnecessary extravagance. Nathan went down to the site to inspect the progress. He expected to find chaos, but what he saw left him intrigued. Chloe was in the center of the space, kneeling in the dirt, carefully adjusting the position of a rosemary seedling. The way she worked, with calculated and delicate movements, contrasted with the contained energy he carried with him. "Are you sure this is functional?" he asked, his voice echoing like an order in the still empty space. Chloe looked up, wiping her hands on a cloth she carried in her apron pocket. Her gaze met his, but she hesitated for a second before responding. "Yes, every plant here was chosen strategically. Rosemary, for example, is known for its calming properties and its ability to purify the air." Nathan crossed his arms, his expression skeptical. "But a garden doesn't solve real problems. It's just decorative at most." That sentence hit Chloe like a personal criticism, but she quickly composed herself. "Mr. Sterling, I understand your hesitation. But this space is not just for you. It's for everyone who works here. A place where they can breathe, reconnect, maybe even find new ideas." "New ideas don't come from rosemary. They come from hard work and discipline," he replied, his tone harsher than he intended. Chloe felt her heart sink. It was as if, with every interaction, she needed to prove herself. But his passion for the project was greater than his wounded pride. "This may not make sense to you now," she replied, keeping her voice steady, "but I believe in what I do. You will see results, even if you don't realize it at first." In the following days, tension continued to permeate the space. Nathan made constant visits to the garden, questioning everything: the choice of plants, the positioning of benches, even the type of stones used to pave the paths. To Chloe, each question sounded like a thinly veiled accusation of incompetence. One afternoon, while adjusting the sprinkler system, Chloe heard Nathan's voice behind her. "Do you really think busy people will take the time to come here? Or is this just an idealistic design that no one will use?" She stood up, her shoulders tense. "I've worked with people as busy as you, and I can guarantee that when they find a space that connects them to the present, they come back. This garden is not about productivity. It's about humanity." There was a tense silence between them. For the first time, Nathan didn't have an immediate answer. He simply watched her, noticing something he hadn't seen before, an unwavering determination, mixed with a vulnerability that echoed within him. A few days later, as Chloe was arranging rocks around a small artificial lake, Nathan appeared again. But this time he seemed less critical. He remained silent, watching her work for a few minutes before finally asking, almost in a whisper, "Why did you start doing this? Working with gardens?" Chloe paused for a moment, surprised by the question. "My grandmother. She said that plants have a silent way of teaching us things. Patience, resilience, how to accept change. After she was gone, continuing to do this helped me deal with everything." Nathan was quiet, processing what he had heard. He felt a pang of empathy, but quickly shook the feeling away. He wasn't good at sharing emotions, and he certainly wasn't prepared to open up to a stranger. But something changed in their dynamic that day. Chloe realized that beneath all of Nathan's coolness and control, there was something broken. Something that, perhaps, she could help fix. The gentle sound of the wind played with the leaves of the young trees, and the fresh scent of freshly watered earth spread throughout the garden under construction. Chloe was bent down, adjusting a bed of lavender, when she heard tentative footsteps behind her. Nathan. He had that presence that made her always adjust her posture, as if she needed to prepare for a verbal battle. "These plants, do they need a lot of maintenance?" His voice was lower than usual, almost as if he was testing the waters. Chloe looked back, noticing Nathan's gaze. It wasn't the usual critical look, but something softer, almost curious. She nodded, a faint smile playing on her lips. "Lavenders are stronger than they seem. They adapt, they grow even in difficult soil." "Interesting," he replied, but his tone suggested he was thinking about something other than plants. The following week, Nathan began to appear in the garden more frequently. Not to criticize or question, but to observe. Chloe noticed that, at certain moments, he would simply remain silent, his hands in his pockets, his eyes fixed on a plant or the reflection of the sun on the lake water. It was at one of those moments that he, without warning, broke the silence. "My mother loved gardens." Chloe, who had her back to him, stopped what she was doing and slowly turned around. There was something in his tone, a weight, as if the words had been stuck for a long time. "She spent hours in our backyard. I was a child, and I thought it was a waste of time. But she said the garden was the only place where time didn't matter." Chloe saw the sadness in his eyes, like a shadow he couldn't shake. "What happened to her garden?" Nathan looked away, jaw clenched. "After she died, my father had everything cemented. He said it was more practical." The words hung in the air, heavy. Chloe felt her heart sink. That man, who seemed so cold and unattainable, carried an open wound that he hid behind layers of control and perfectionism. In the days that followed, Chloe began to notice nuances in Nathan that had previously gone unnoticed. He was methodical, yes, but also thoughtful in subtle ways. One afternoon, as she was working in a corner of the garden, she found a bottle of water and a note in hurried handwriting: "Don't forget to hydrate." Chloe laughed when she read the message, but felt an unexpected warmth in her chest. It was a small but significant gesture. She also started opening up more to Nathan. On a sunny afternoon, while explaining the purpose of a winding path she had designed, she mentioned how gardens helped her cope with the loss of her grandmother. "When everything seemed to be falling apart, the only place I could breathe was among the plants. I think they reminded me that life goes on, even when it seems like it doesn't." Nathan listened intently, as if her words echoed something inside him. For the first time, he felt he was not alone in his pain. One night, Nathan found Chloe still in the garden, adjusting the lights that would illuminate the space at night. She was focused, her face illuminated by the warm glow of the lamps. He stood still for a moment, watching her. There was something about Chloe, a quiet strength, a resilience, that he found captivating. "You work too much," he said, finally breaking the silence. She looked at him, surprised. "Coming from you, that's almost funny." Nathan let out a short laugh, and for the first time Chloe saw something that looked like a genuine smile. It touched on a fair point. The two laughed together, and for the first time, the space between them felt less crowded. These small moments began to create a bridge between them. Chloe no longer saw Nathan as just a cold, controlling CEO, she was beginning to see a man who, like her, was trying to find peace in the midst of chaos. And Nathan, in turn, realized that Chloe was not just a talented landscaper, but someone who understood the transformative power of what she did. Nathan was walking down the stairs that led to the garden under construction, but his steps were slower than usual. Something had been bothering him ever since his assistant, Emily, had casually mentioned that she had researched Eden Botanical Design and discovered that Chloe's company was struggling financially. It was obvious that Emily had no ill intent, it was just part of her job to understand suppliers and partners. But to Nathan, it felt like a window into a world Chloe was trying to keep closed off. He found her working as usual, her hands covered in dirt as she adjusted a small wooden bench beneath a newly planted tree. Chloe seemed lost in her work, and Nathan realized how characteristic of her it was, an almost meditative concentration that made the world around her disappear. "Chloe," he called, with a slight hesitation that was rarely present in his voice. She looked up, smiling slightly. "Are you here to inspect progress or criticize the bank's choice?" Nathan tried to smile back, but the concern in his eyes betrayed him. "I actually wanted to talk." Chloe stood up, wiping her hands on her apron. "About what?" He hesitated, but decided to be direct. "I heard your company is having difficulties." Chloe's smile instantly disappeared. Stiffness gripped her shoulders, and she crossed her arms defensively. And who told you that? My assistant mentioned it. She does research on all of our partners. It wasn't invasion, it was precautionary. Chloe pursed her lips, her eyes narrowing. I didn't know that my financial background was a prerequisite for designing a garden. It's not that. Nathan took a step forward, trying to close the emotional distance he felt growing between them. I just thought maybe I could help. Help me? Chloe laughed, but the sound was full of irony. Let me guess, you think you can save me with a loan or a generous check? And that? Nathan blinked, surprised by the intensity in her voice. He hadn't expected so much resistance, but he realized he had touched something delicate. Chloe, it's not charity. It's just support. I know what it's like to feel like you're carrying everything on your shoulders. Sometimes it helps to accept a helping hand. Chloe felt her chest tighten. His words sounded sincere, but there was something about his offer that struck her as an affront. Throughout her life, her grandmother had taught her to be independent, to never depend on anyone. Even when the company's financial situation worsened, Chloe refused to seek outside help, because for her, that would be admitting that she wasn't capable. I appreciate the intention, Nathan, but I don't need your help, she said, her voice firmer than she felt. And frankly, that's none of your business. There was a tense silence between them. Nathan felt like he had taken a wrong step into a minefield. He knew Chloe was proud, but he didn't imagine the suggestion of help could hurt her so deeply. Okay, he replied, stepping back. If you don't want help, I respect that. Just, if you change your mind, I'm here. Chloe nodded but didn't say anything else. As soon as Nathan left, she returned to the bench, but her hands were shaking as she tried to finish her work. In the following days, the interaction between them became colder. Nathan kept his distance, feeling like he had crossed a line he shouldn't have. Chloe, in turn, tried to carry on as if nothing had happened, but the incident had left a mark. Meanwhile, something else began to happen between them. In an unguarded moment, as they worked together to adjust the garden lighting, Nathan's hands touched Chloe's as they ran the same wire. It was a brief but electrifying connection. They both immediately recoiled, as if they had touched something forbidden. Chloe felt her heart race. Why did a simple touch make her so nervous? And why couldn't she get Nathan out of her head, even when he irritated her? Nathan, in turn, began to avoid getting too close to Chloe. He knew he was crossing a dangerous line. It was his duty to keep it strictly professional, but every time he saw Chloe smiling at the plants or explaining the meaning of each choice in the garden, he felt something stir inside him. The garden was almost finished, but something bigger was growing between them, something they both feared, but couldn't ignore. The large hall was filled with eclectic voices, controlled laughter, and the sound of clinking crystal glasses. Neuron Systems' annual event was a milestone in the technology sector, attracting the industry's largest investors and partners. Nathan was standing near the main stage, adjusting the cuffs of his shirt. The warm lighting in the room contrasted with the cold he felt in his chest. His eyes swept the room, finding faces both familiar and strange, but, as always, he couldn't identify many of them. Prosopagnosia. A curse that he had learned to hide, but that at that moment seemed like an insurmountable barrier. Emily, his assistant, came over and whispered, "The investors are eager to hear from you. Everything is fine?" Nathan nodded automatically, but the pressure in his head was suffocating. He felt sweat pooling under his collar. The last few weeks had been exhausting, the garden, the incessant demands of the company, and most of all, the conflicting emotions he could barely process when it came to Chloe. Meanwhile, Chloe was on the side of the event, discreetly observing the scene. She had been invited to show the garden's progress as part of the presentation on innovation and well-being in the corporate environment. Despite the sophisticated environment, she felt out of place among those people in impeccable suits and practiced smiles. But there was something else that caught his attention: Nathan. He seemed more tense than usual, his movements stiff, his jaw clenched. She recognized the signs. When he took the stage, Chloe felt her chest tighten. He began to speak, his voice as steady and controlled as ever. But after a few sentences, there was a pause. Small but noticeable. Nathan blinked rapidly, his gaze lost on the audience. He tried to continue, but the words seemed to escape him. The room fell silent. The air around Nathan felt thin. Each pair of eyes fixed on him seemed to multiply the weight on his shoulders. He tried to inhale deeply, but the air didn't seem to reach his lungs. The sound of the microphone fell into a distant hum as the stage seemed to rotate. "Excuse me," he muttered, and hurriedly left the stage, leaving a trail of confused murmurs and puzzled looks. Chloe instinctively followed him. She found him in the hallway, leaning against the wall with one hand pressed to his chest. His breathing was short and labored, his eyes closed as if he were trying to block out the world. "Nathan," she called softly, approaching cautiously. He opened his eyes, and when he saw her, something in him broke. I can't breathe." "You're having a panic attack," she said, her voice calm but firm. "Come with me." Without waiting for a response, Chloe took his hand and guided him to the side exit. The cool night air enveloped the two as they reached the still unfinished garden. She led him to a bench under a small, newly planted tree. "Breathe with me," she said, kneeling in front of him. "Slowly. Inhale through your nose, that's it. Now let go." Nathan tried to keep up, but the erratic rhythm of his breathing made it difficult. Chloe placed one of her hands over his, feeling the tension in her fingers. "Look around," she said. "What do you see?" He forced his eyes to focus. "Plants. Lights. The lake." "That's right," she encouraged. "You're here, Nathan. Not on stage. Not with those people. Only here. Focus." Gradually, the tightness in his chest began to loosen. He took his first deep breath in minutes and let it out as if releasing years of accumulated weight. For a few moments, the silence between them was filled only by the sound of water running in the small lake. Nathan finally looked at Chloe, and something in his gaze was different, a raw, unguarded vulnerability. "Thank you," he said, his voice hoarse. Chloe just smiled lightly, but that moment seemed charged with something much bigger. A connection that transcended words or explanations. But as the minutes passed, Nathan began to withdraw emotionally. He backed away, quickly rising from the bench. "I need to go back," he said, avoiding looking directly at her. Chloe felt a pang of frustration and sadness, but she knew she couldn't force him to deal with something he wasn't ready to face yet. When Nathan disappeared back into the building, she sat there, looking out at the lake. As much as she wanted to help him, there were barriers he needed to break down on his own. The rain fell thinly, almost like a veil that enveloped the garden under construction. Chloe remained standing in the center of the space, looking up at the cloudy sky. Work on the project was almost complete, but something felt unfinished, not in the garden, but in herself. Since the event in which Nathan had the panic attack, he seemed more distant, avoiding unnecessary interactions with her. The absence of his presence had left an unexpected void in the garden and in his routine. As he adjusted the leaves of a fern, he heard footsteps behind him. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Nathan had a particular way of moving, steady but hesitant steps, as if he was never sure whether to move forward. "You picked the perfect time to inspect the work, in the middle of a light rain," Chloe commented, without hiding her irony. "I didn't come to inspect," Nathan replied, his voice lower than usual. "I came to talk." Chloe finally turned around, her gaze locking with his. Nathan was standing there, hands in his coat pockets, and something in his eyes made her realize this was no casual visit. "I'm listening," she said, keeping her tone neutral, but her heart sped up. Nathan took a deep breath, as if preparing to dive into deep water. "The garden. His idea, it wasn't just because my therapist suggested it. It was because I remembered something I thought I had forgotten." Chloe frowned, tilting her head slightly. "My mother loved gardens," he continued. His voice had a distant tone, as if he were speaking directly to memories. "She spent hours taking care of the plants. I was a child, I didn't understand why it was so important to her. But now, I realize that was where she found peace." He paused, looking away to the small lake next door. "After she died, everything changed. My father, he didn't see the point in it. He concreted the garden, took away everything she loved. And somehow it did the same to me. It was like he was trying to erase any trace of her." Chloe felt a lump in her throat when she heard his words. "You miss her." "I'm sorry," he admitted, his voice wavering. "But I'm also afraid to remember. Every time I hold on to something, it seems like the world finds a way to rip it away from me. So I avoid it. It's easier that way." Chloe remained silent for a moment, absorbing the confession. She saw something in Nathan that few others would, a man who was not cold and controlled by nature, but by necessity, trying to protect himself from a world he believed to be cruel. "I understand," Chloe finally said, her voice soft. "I lost my grandmother a few months ago. She was everything to me. When she left, it felt like the ground disappeared from beneath my feet. But working in this garden..." She looked around, taking a deep breath. "This has been my way of dealing with the pain. To keep a part of her alive." Nathan looked at her intensely, as if her words echoed something inside him that he didn't know how to express. For a brief moment, the silence between them felt comfortable, almost comforting. But then Nathan squared his shoulders and crossed his arms, the tension returning to his body like armor. "Chloe, the truth is that the company is struggling. Sales are not meeting expectations, investors are losing patience. I don't know if we can continue with the project." His words were a blow. Chloe felt the air escape from her lungs, as if the world around her had stopped. "Are you canceling the garden?" she asked in disbelief. Nathan shook his head, frustrated. "It is not an easy decision. I know how much this means to you. But I need to prioritize. And investors don't see value in something that doesn't generate immediate profit. Chloe pursed her lips, fighting anger and disappointment. It doesn't generate profit, but it generates something you clearly need, Nathan. Something your team needs. This garden is not just a beautiful space. It is a place that can bring balance, clarity. I don't have time for balance. Nathan exploded, his voice louder than he intended. I have an entire company depending on me. People who trust that I will keep this going. I can't afford sentimentality. Chloe took a step back, as if his words had hit her physically. So that's it? Does everything here, all the work, mean nothing to you? Nathan opened his mouth to respond, but stopped. He wanted to say it meant more than he could admit. But his pride and fear prevented him from opening up more. I'm sorry, he murmured, before turning and leaving Chloe alone in the rain. She remained there, motionless, feeling the cold water run down her face. The garden around her, which once felt like a refuge, now felt like a reminder of something she couldn't save. The sun slowly rose over the city, spilling golden light over the unfinished garden. Chloe was there before dawn, in rubber boots and a worn coat, arranging the last of the plants that had arrived the night before. She looked around, watching what was already done. The artificial lake shouted softly, the polished stones drew winding paths, and the young trees began to spread shadow over the strategically positioned benches. But the garden was not complete yet. And even if Nathan had officially cancelled the project, Chloe couldn't abandon it. The space was not just a job for her, it was a reflection of everything she believed, everything she wanted to offer to the world. She took a deep breath and took off a crumpled envelope from her pocket. It was his last financial reserve, a value he had kept carefully for years. It was for emergencies, and in her eyes saving that garden was an emergency. Nathan walked through Neuron Systems corridors with quick steps and rigid posture. Since his conversation with Chloe, a growing concern has taken over him. Her words echoed in her mind, especially when she said the garden was something he needed. But he was good at ignoring what he felt. Always out. This was how it survived, focusing on the next problem at the next meeting in the next report. But as he passed a window that sought the garden, he stopped. Chloe was there, kneeling on the earth, working alone. She was covered with earth, and there was a determined shine in her eyes, even at a distance. Something inside Nathan squeezed. Why didn't she give up? Why was this so important to her? In the following days, Chloe worked non-stop. She called old colleagues to help when she could, but most of the time she was alone. Even exhausted, she felt an inexplicable energy when she saw the garden taking shape. Each plant she put on the ground, every detail she adjusted, seemed to whisper to her, continue. But the work was not just physical. It was emotional. As she worked, her grandmother's memories came out. His warm laugh, the way he patiently explained how to prune a shrub, and the smell of butter cookies that always filled the kitchen. I'm doing it for you, Grandma, Chloe murmured, feeling the tears accumulate. And for me. Because I need to believe that something beautiful can grow even in the middle of chaos. The day the garden was finally ready, Chloe arrived early to give the last touches. She walked through the space, adjusting a sheet here, a stone there, until everything was perfect. The sound of steps took her out of her thoughts. She turned and found Nathan stopped at the garden entrance. He was motionless, his eyes walking through the space as if he was seeing something he didn't expect. I thought I had cancelled it, he said, but his voice didn't carry the firmness of before. You cancelled, Chloe replied, her tone quiet but resolute. But I finished anyway. Nathan entered the garden, the shoes echoing gently against the rocks of the way. Every detail seemed carefully thought, as if each plant and each element told a story. He stopped in front of the lake, observing the reflection of the sky in the water. Why did you do that? He finally asked, turning to Chloe. Because it needed to be done, she simply answered. Because this place matters. You may not see it now, but one day you will see. Nathan felt something stir in his chest. He tried to focus on the garden, professionalism, but the barriers he had built over the years began to give in. He looked around again, but this time with other eyes. Strategically positioned seats seemed to invite to rest. The trees seemed to embrace the space, creating a sense of security. And the lake water. He couldn't say why, but she calmed him. While Nathan was in the garden, some employees began to appear, curious. They entered silent, as if space demanded respect. Some sat on the benches, others just walked the ways. One of them took off his shoes and stepped barefoot on the grass, smiling like a child. Nathan observed all this, and for the first time in a long time, he felt something close to peace. He turned to Chloe, and his eyes on his eyes was different. You were right, he said, his voice low. Chloe raised an eyebrow, surprised. What? I needed it, he admitted, almost as if he was confessing a secret. More than I imagined. The morning was clear, the dyed sky of a clear blue that seemed to reflect the serenity of the garden. Chloe was standing beside the artificial lake, observing the reflection of the sun dance in the water. The space, finally complete, was an extension of its soul. Each plant, every stone and every detail told a story of resilience and love. But despite the pride for the work completed, there was a restlessness in his chest. Since the day Nathan had visited the garden and admitted reluctantly that he needed that place, he had not returned. Chloe had convinced himself that his silence was the confirmation that for him, that was still just a distraction, a luxury that did not fit his practical view of leadership. She sighed and ran a hand over her hair arrested in a ponytail, trying to ward off the thoughts that insisted on invading her mind. The sound of steps at the entrance of the garden interrupted his daydream. When he turned, he saw Nathan stop there with an indecipherable expression. "Nathan," she said, surprised. "Can I?" he asked, gesturing to the surrounding space. Chloe hesitated for a moment before nodding. "Of course. The garden is yours, after all." Nathan walked slowly, as if absorbing every detail. He stopped in front of a Benjamin fig tree, gently touching the leaves as if they were something precious. Chloe watched him, trying to understand what was going on in his mind. "It's more than I expected," he finally said, his voice low. "Much more?" Chloe crossed his arms, trying to maintain professional posture. "I'm glad you liked it." Nathan turned to her, her fixed eyes on hers. "I not only liked it, Chloe. I realized something important." She arched an eyebrow, waiting for him to continue. "When I canceled the project, I thought I was doing the right one. Protect the company, maintain the priorities. But in the process, I forgot something fundamental: people. I forgot myself." He paused, taking a deep breath. "This garden. It's not just a beautiful space. It is a reminder that we need to stop, breathe, and remember why we start all this." Chloe felt her heart accelerate. There was something in his sincerity that completely disarmed her. "I want to reopen the project," Nathan said, advancing a step. "I want this garden to be the symbol of what Neuron Systems represents: well-being and innovation walking together. Not just for me, but for everyone who works here." She blinked, surprised. "Are you serious?" "More than ever," he replied, with a light smile that illuminated his face unexpectedly. Nathan took another step toward her, hesitating for a moment before continuing. "And I want to apologize too." Chloe frowned, confused. "To apologize? For having cancelled the project. For having underestimated you. And especially for having away." He lowered his eyes for a moment, as if fighting to find the right words. "I was afraid, Chloe. Fear of clinging to something and losing again. But I realized that the biggest mistake I could make would be not to try." Chloe's heart seemed to beat each word faster. She opened her mouth to answer, but Nathan continued before she could. "I feel something for you," he said, with a raw honesty that caught her off guard. "And it scares me. But at the same time, I don't want to ignore what I feel." Chloe felt his words echo inside her. She had fought against her own feelings, trying to keep them in the background while working in the garden. But now, with Nathan stopped in front of her, vulnerable and honest, she could no longer deny. "I feel something too," she admitted, her voice almost a whisper. A genuine smile formed on Nathan's lips. He took another step, now so close that Chloe could feel his warmth. "So maybe we can start over," he suggested. "Not only among us, but also with this garden. I want us to work together, Chloe. Not only in this space, but in other projects. I want to bring this to other companies, so that more people can have what we find here." Chloe smiled, feeling a mixture of relief and happiness. "I would love." The two were silent for a moment, just looking at the garden around. For the first time in a long time, both felt they were exactly where they should be. The sound of the wind whispering between the leaves of the trees seemed orchestrated, almost musical. Chloe was standing in the center of Neuron Systems' garden, observing a small group of employees gathered at one of the banks. They talked, laughed, while the soft aroma of the lavender floated through the air. It was a scenario that, months ago, she could just imagine, and now it was real. Nathan was beside her, hands in his coat pockets, but the quiet smile on his face revealed a change that went beyond the physical. He looked lighter, more present. "They are using the garden exactly as you predicted," he said, leaning slightly toward Chloe. "It wasn't just a prediction," she answered, crossing her arms, but smiling at him. "It was hope. And perhaps a little stubbornness." Nathan laughed softly, and Chloe felt the warmth of that laugh reverberate inside her. He was no longer the rigid and impenetrable man she had known. Nathan had learned to open with her, with herself, and the world around her. As the day passed, Chloe and Nathan moved through the space, adjusting small details in the garden and interacting with the staff who stopped to thank or just share how the space was changing their routines. An employee, a young woman named Rachel, approached them with a shy smile. "I just wanted to say that this place has been like a refuge for me. I work in the financial sector, and sometimes the pressure is huge. But here, I can breathe." Thank you for that. Chloe felt her eyes Mars at, but kept the composure. It means a lot to me. The garden was created for this, so that you have a place where you can find balance. Nathan, beside him, put his hand on Rachel's shoulder, something he would never have done before. Rachel, that's exactly why we decided to create more spaces like this. The young woman smiled widely before she walked away, leaving Chloe and Nathan at a silent and significant moment. Later, when falling in the afternoon, Chloe and Nathan were sitting on the bench near the lake, the dyed sky with orange and pink. Nathan held a small block of notes where he had scratched ideas for new projects. So this next garden we're planning, he started, looking at her. Do you think people will react the same way? If we put our hearts in it, I'm sure yes, Chloe replied, leaning forward and looking at the reflection of the trees in the water. Nathan closed the block and looked at her, his expression softening. Chloe? I would never have done it without you. Not only the garden, but everything. You helped me understand that there is no problem feeling. To allow me to be vulnerable. She looked at him, her heart speeding up, but her expression was serene. And you taught me that you can start over, even when we think everything has already been lost. Nathan smiled and for the first time held her hand, intertwining her fingers. There was no hesitation, no barriers. Just the promise of something they were both ready to build together. A few weeks later, Chloe and Nathan were on the ground of a new partner company, inspecting the space where they would build the next garden. The place was vast, a blank screen that promised infinite possibilities. Nathan was standing beside her, her eyes shining with renewed enthusiasm. What do you think? What is your vision for this? Chloe looked around, already imagining paths, textures, colors. I see a space where people will reconnect, not only with each other, but themselves. Maybe a sensory garden, something that touches every senses. Nathan nodded, a smile forming. And do you think we can do it together? Chloe turned to him, his eyes finding his. I think there is nothing we can't do together. As they walked side by side, talking and laughing, the shadows of the day began to extend, but around them, the world seemed full of light. And so they went ahead, not just as partners at work, but as accomplices of a new chapter that was barely beginning to be written. Our story for today comes to an end, friends, but before we say goodbye, I need your help to keep this rhythm of stories alive. If this story moved, inspired, or simply entertained you, don't hesitate to give this video a like. It's as simple as a click, but it means the world to us. Do you want more stories like this one? Then subscribe to Happiness of Love and don't forget to activate the notification bell so you never miss any of our new adventures. Remember, we have a new video every 2 days. Share this video with your friends and family, who knows? You might inspire someone to make a positive change in the world. Leave us a comment letting us know which part of the story touched your heart the most. We love reading your thoughts and connecting with you. And if you're watching this on your phone, don't forget to hit the hype button to show your enthusiasm and help us reach even more people with these inspiring stories. Thank you for being part of the Happiness of Love community. Your support is like the heartbeat of this channel, vital and full of life. Oh, and before you go, check out the video popping up on the screen right now. It's another amazing story you won't want to miss. See you in 2 days with another story that will take your breath away. Until then, keep the rhythm of love and inspiration alive, one beat at a time.